Hey guys, Wendy Taylor here, food and body image coach and non-diet dietitian. I'm so glad that you're joining me today. So say hello if you come on. Give me an emoji, a heads up, hey, how you doing? And if you're watching this later, be sure and hashtag replay in the comments so I can come back and see that you joined us. Okay, today I want to discuss, first of all, how you can live and eat intuitively if you have diabetes. So I also want to talk you through one of the biggest myths that I hear clients tell me after they've been to see their doctor and they've been diagnosed with diabetes. So as always, please leave me your comments. Give me a hello if you're coming on so I can see you join me and I can see you. And I'll circle back at the end and answer any questions if you have them for me. No one gets left behind in these trainings. Okay, when I started out as a dietitian, I was a diabetes educator, and intuitive eating and health at every size was literally never talked about. When I first learned about it, I wasn't quite sure about it, but then I read intuitive eating, and later I read health at any size. And I started to do the research. See, we've all grown up with diet culture literally all around us. So if you didn't know much about intuitive eating, I can see how you would be skeptical of it, because I was too. I was initially drawn to nutrition because I struggled with my own disordered eating in high school and in college. So before we jump into the myths around diabetes today, I feel like it's really important to explain, first of all, the differences between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So as always, leave me any questions you have and I'll circle back. I do also want to say that I use the term diabetes interchangeably across the board because honestly, I see the same symptoms with people. But there's a subtle difference in the way that I do support clients with type 1 or type 2 diabetes. There are actually more than just two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. But I think for today, I'm just going to hone in on these two. So type 1 is an autoimmune disorder. So what happens is when something goes awry in our immune system starts to recognize an organ or a part of the body as an invader, and it starts to really attack that part of the body. So with type 1, the pancreas is being attacked, specifically these beta cells of the pancreas. And the beta cells are what make the insulin. So with type 1, we have no insulin production. So these folks need to be taking insulin in order to make sure that their body will be able to handle things like the carbohydrates that it ingests. So with type 2, the pancreas is still making insulin, but the receptor cells literally don't know how to use it. So basically the receptor cells, they're not communicating in the same language. So this is what we call insulin resistance. It's when the insulin and the cells can't communicate very well. And when this happens, insulin cannot be utilized. And this causes essentially the pancreas to start producing more insulin because it's trying to communicate with the receptor cells. And it's almost like as if you were trying to communicate with somebody and you just kept screaming louder and louder and louder, but that person doesn't speak your language. So this can cause stress on the pancreas because like the yelling, it's just like a voice that starts to wear out over time. So the beta cells of the pancreas, they start to just tire out and eventually they stop producing insulin like they should. And it can start to kind of look like type 1. So in the beginning, many of the medications that are prescribed are to improve this communication between the insulin and receptors and the beta cells. So eventually, it can progress to the point where the pancreas doesn't produce enough or any insulin on its own, And this is what's happening to the body in this type of diabetes. So this is the point where someone with type 2 would need to start to begin to utilize insulin. Now, typically in the medical world, there will be like thresholds or cutoffs where you would call, for instance, like pre-diabetes, and then there are diabetes. This is sort of subjective because these numbers honestly are determined by humans, but that's the way they do it in our current culture in the medical field. So honestly, you guys, the best way to look at it is to kind of understand what your body typically does to begin with, because some people's bodies honestly are more sensitive to certain things. So like insulin, for instance, and insulin might look slightly elevated, but that might just be how their body is. So it could be related to something temporary in the body or some kind of stress or a dysregulation that could be causing an elevated blood sugar or elevated insulin levels in the blood. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that is from diabetes or that that's going to become diabetes. So there's a lot of things that can contribute to insulin resistance. And many times, more than not, when I talk with people, they're under enormous stress loads. And there's just so much fear mongering out there, you guys, that I see people that are just super stressed out over a diagnosis, and it's actually making things worse. So then, of course, people become obsessed with dieting. So in this case, dieting, cutting out sugar, going low carb. And I just want you guys to understand what the heck is going on with your body and what the heck is going on with all the fear mongering in the healthcare world today. I want the science that I give you today in this training to be really grounding and really helpful for you guys. So many times I leave the diagnosis out when I'm working with clients to heal their relationship with food, because y'all, no matter what type of diabetes they have or what type of challenge they have, whether it's binge eating disorder, whether it's diabetes, we get to the root of the cause, which is never about the food. There are so many overlaps that come into play when you have disordered eating and thoughts about movement or our bodies, or have any kind of chronic condition, honestly. It doesn't matter what type of diabetes that people have, what they're struggling with is similar. So maybe some of you guys have diabetes, or maybe you've been recently diagnosed with diabetes, or maybe you're trying to figure out how to eat and live more intuitively and take care of yourself. So if this is you, let me know. Give me a thumbs up. Let's talk about the biggest myth: sugar. Okay, our brain functions on carbohydrates. So even if you have diabetes, you still need carbohydrates. So our body's need for carbs, for energy, doesn't just disappear because we get diagnosed with diabetes. So when we're restricting something, remember, our cravings are really going to shoot through the roof because we're putting this food off limits. So when we're elevating certain foods, we're putting them on a pedestal. And what happens when we do this? You guys know, if you've been to my cravings training, your cells aren't able to get the sugar that they need. And our cells don't know that there's sugar in our bloodstream. So guess what? Our cells are going to think we're starving. So your cells are going to continue to keep sending signals to your brain to eat food, to eat carbohydrates, because we need that quickly because we don't have any right now. That's what our cells are telling us. So when your blood sugar starts to creep up and get high because sugar isn't able to get into your cells, your cravings for carbs are going to really shoot through the roof. And this is a biological mechanism. It's completely not your fault. It's your body's way of trying to keep you alive. So you combine this with your desire to restrict carbs, this is going to make you feel completely out of whack, completely out of control around carbs and really disoriented. So then we have anyone restricting this kind of food, and it goes back to that binge restriction cycle that I'm always talking about. When you finally do eat the carbs, you're going to give in to that craving, and you're going to eat probably more than you would have wanted to or even need. And when you have diabetes, this is going to put your blood sugar through the roof because your body's not going to be able to keep up with it as quickly. So then your blood sugar will just continue to be high. And then you'll feel like you want even more carbs because the cells are going to continue to send those signals to your brain. There's a lot of stuff going on. But this is not just mental. It is very physiological. So when you have someone taking insulin, on top of that, it's dosed based on the number of carbs that you're eating. So I often find that when I work with clients and then they fall into this pattern and they start binging, restricting on carbs, and then binging on carbs, this cycle, there's a lot of guilt and shame, first of all, that come with it. And then it can make them feel very disconnected from it. So they aren't even aware really of how much they ate, or maybe they overestimated in their head because they feel so ashamed by eating it. They'll tell me like they ate the entire box of something, but maybe in reality it was only a couple of handfuls. Or maybe on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes, they aren't willing to admit how much they actually ate. And no guilt nor shame in that at all, but they'll tell me maybe it's only a handful when really they ate the whole box. So I'm not saying this to judge or cause shame around any of it, but it just gets really complicated when they're being dosed a certain amount of insulin based on carbohydrate amounts to try to control their blood sugar. So it gets really weird, this yo-yo pattern that we're trying to balance with medication as well. So for example, if you underdose insulin, then you'll see high blood sugar levels. But if you overdose it, blood sugar will drop. And you're going to have to eat more carbs to bring it back up, which can make it feel really out of control sometimes. I get it. So it becomes this mental game and this cycle. And one of the biggest questions that I get related to diabetes is, how do you eat intuitively when you have diabetes? So I get people tell me that I can't eat intuitively because I have diabetes, or, well, I can't stop dieting because I will get diabetes. So first of all, if this is you, and if you have this fear over eating a lot of food or eating carbs or sugar, I want to highly encourage, if this is you, okay, I would highly encourage you to think of it in a different way. Think of it in terms of correlation versus causation. Okay, there's a lot of fear mongering in our society around this, and it can be really hard to tune out, to embrace the principles of intuitive eating that I'm always talking about. And I think it's really important to know that there's a difference between correlation and causation. Now, I'm not denying there's a relationship between certain things. Okay. There is definitely a relationship between larger bodies and diabetes, for example. However, I think we need to look at this with fresh eyes and understand that correlation means a relationship between something, and causation means that one thing directly caused another. So, with that example, I want to give you this. Did you know that there's a correlation in ice cream sales and drowning? So, why is that? Why do you think there's a relationship between those two things? Because maybe it's at the pool, or maybe it's based on location. So maybe more people in the South can swim longer, or maybe they have more ice cream because it's hotter outside. There are so many different things that could contribute to the reason people eat more ice cream. There are so many variables, but that doesn't mean that if you eat ice cream that you're going to drown. It just doesn't happen that way. It doesn't mean that if you drown, it's because you had ice cream. So that's the difference between correlation and causation. We can so easily jump to the research and say, well, okay, well, if you're in a larger body, then you're going to get diabetes. And honestly, you guys, this is like saying it. People drown because they ate ice cream. And it's just not true. So what you can start to look at is all the other variables there are. Okay, so people are used to hearing, you need to lose weight, you need to diet, and they get stuck in the yo-yo pattern of weight cycling. And this increases insulin resistance that may actually lead to diabetes down the road. So maybe it's not because of them being in a larger body in the first place. Maybe it's because of the weight cycling that came with the dieting. So maybe it's the stress of being in a larger body, or the stress that came with the dieting and the weight cycling. Maybe it's because of so many other variables. But when we look at the research, there's a whole setup of studies in which researchers said, okay, cool. Well, if it's because people are fat, let's just do liposuction. Let's suck all the fat out of their body, and we'll see if the disease resolves itself. But guess what? It didn't, because it's not about the weight. It's about the other factors, the variables going on in our body, and what all might be associated with that. You can't just take the fat out of someone's body and make the condition go away. If it were really causation, then what happened is we could do liposuction and our diabetes would go away. But diabetes also occurs in all body sizes. So what do you say when someone in a smaller body gets diabetes? Oh, you need to lose weight? No, they would never say that, because that clearly isn't a factor. So how can people be getting diabetes when they aren't in a larger body? So then it's not just about the weight. Look, I love the books Health at Any Size and Body Respect by Linda Bacon. They're really great at explaining these types of things, because the culture that we live in today, it's hard. And so always remember that. This is not what surrounds us every day in the media, on TV, at the gym, in our doctor's offices. You have to be really intentional about tuning this out. And even then, it's really hard. And honestly, it's tough. It's tough as heck to do that. So that's why I'm here. And that's why we have our Facebook group, Ditching Diets Together. And I just want to jump right in to some of the biggest myths that I hear related to that. And number one is sugar. let's just jump right in onto the sugar, because there are some people that believe that sugar causes diabetes, and then there are some people that think that if they have diabetes that they can't eat sugar, and both are totally, completely false. So there are just so many factors that contribute to someone getting diabetes, and genetics is the largest contributing factor. So there's really only a small percentage of personal behaviors that would contribute to someone developing diabetes or not. And I think that is honestly one of the hardest things for people to wrap their head around when we talk about this. Society puts the responsibility on the person. So like it's their own fault, or that they did something wrong. And it's a lot easier for us to think that this is the case. And it makes us feel like maybe we're more in control if there's some things that we can change. And that's why this myth doesn't want to seem to go away, this myth about sugar, but it's not true. So this is the biggest place for blame. I think people think they have diabetes and it's all their own fault. And I see this played out, you guys, in people that struggle with disordered eating and they don't have diabetes. So they'll have this fear, this, oh my God, I do not need to eat sugar. And it puts a massive fear in our society around it, because people are terrified that they're going to get diabetes. And this speaks so much to a lot of the healthism that I see in our current culture and in society today. So it also feeds into the problem, because one of the things that we do know actually does contribute to diabetes is insulin resistance, which is a factor that contributes to diabetes, is weight cycling. So people that have been on this diet roller coaster for years and their weight goes up and down and up and down and up and down, it puts a lot of stress. And one of the side effects of the stress that the weight cycling puts on our body is insulin resistance. So when we look at things like this, fear of sugar, fear of carbs is contributing to a lot of this. So this is a really frustrating myth for me, because it really affects people's relationship with food. And it actually does the very thing that we're trying to protect our body from. So all the weight stigma and the health effects of chronic stress that this causes us. Let's talk about some of the behaviors that I see justified in people's heads when they find out they have diabetes or even prediabetes, which is a total buzzword thrown around entirely too much. But one of the problems that I see in healthcare is this, and I just want you to think about what I'm about to say. Why are we prescribing to fat people exactly what we're diagnosing in thin people with an eating disorder? This is the kind of thing I see all the time with people diagnosed with diabetes. And if that same prescription was given to someone without diabetes, it would be called an eating disorder. And when someone has this diagnosis, I'm seeing people being told to diet. So I see all kinds of push to low carb, to no carb, to keto, or to intermittent fast, or whatever the new diet trend is. And these all contribute to really disordered eating behaviors around food. So unfortunately, this is the way that our healthcare professionals and society talks about diabetes. And they place a lot of fear around the complications of it. I don't want to dismiss any of the complications, of course, around diabetes. They're serious, but it can be blown out of proportion, which can create a lot of fear around food in general. And it actually creates like a negative dynamic around eating and just honestly just taking care of yourself. So there's also a lot of fear I see around medication, which is much like this stigma around mental health medication as well. So the message being given to people is that you can heal this by, eating a certain way or by taking vitamins and all that kind of stuff. And I also see a big push towards exercise that can lead to a really bad place or even a really stressful place for people. So if we circle back now to chronic stress and the effects that that can have on the body, things can just get really messy really quickly. So much of what I have heard from clients is that people get stuck. They get stuck in this mentality that everything that you eat is either, hurting you or harming you. And I think that's probably medical medium, Instagram or something. But there's a lot of stuff floating around out there. And if you feel like every decision that you make is either a life or death decision, then that can be really stressful. So if any of this resonated with you today, first off, if you aren't in our Facebook group, Ditching Diets Together, come hang with us over there. I love that group, you guys. And if you want to take it a step further and join our community of food freedom fighters and get access to weekly trainings just like this, Zoom meetings together where we meet up, book clubs, and even more, when you become a food freedom fighter, then click on the link. I'm going to put it in the description. I'm going to put it in the comments. Or you can visit wendytaylor.com/members. It is about time for me to go cook dinner, and I will see you guys next time. I'm so glad that you were able to join me today. Bye, guys.